You marched in protest for the poor of every shade and hue. So many hardships you endured for those who needed you. You stirred the nation's heart and mind. Your message still is clear. The color's not how we're defined. Your memory's always near. Each year your birthday's a holiday. The nation honors you and wonders when we'll see the day your dream at last comes true. Ladies and gentlemen, let's make this dream come true. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Thomas. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Rabbi Kenny Wise. Rabbi Wise is Executive Director for Houston Hillel. He is also a lecturer in religious studies at the University of Houston. Prior to arriving in Houston in 2001, Rabbi Wise served as a congregational rabbi in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C. He earned a degree in communication from the University of California at San Diego, a secondary social studies teaching credentials from the University of Colorado in Boulder, along with a master's degree in Hebrew letters and rabbinical ordination from Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. Rabbi Wise is the chair of the Central Conference of American Rabbis Ad Hoc Committee on the Campus Rabbinate, and is a past president of the Houston Rabbinical Association and the University of Houston Campus Ministers Association. He is married to Rabbi Amy Wise, founder and executive director of the Initiative for Jewish Women, and they enjoy spending time with their sons, Eli and Joshua. I am pleased to call Rabbi Wise to the podium for brief remarks.
Last week, while listening to Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, one passage in particular struck me. Almost 50 years ago, Dr. King connected with those in attendance in the shadow of the Lincoln Memorial when he said to them, "I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come here from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive." From the bondage of Egyptian slavery to the horrors of the Holocaust, members of the Jewish community have suffered for thousands of years. But in contrast to Dr. King's words at the Lincoln Memorial, those of us in the Jewish community do not use terms like creative suffering or unearned suffering. We do not view our suffering as redemptive. In fact, the Jewish response to Dr. King's words that first entered my mind last week was this very different, often repeated description of Jewish history. They tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. As we can tell from the laughter, it sounds irreverent, it sounds flippant. They tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. But once we get beyond our initial impression, we find a profound and particularly Jewish response to suffering. That we should emerge from our suffering with the courage to continue living. Jewish tradition teaches, Im ein kemach ein Torah, life cannot exist without sustenance. And the final two words summarizing the Jewish experience, let's eat, represents Judaism's emphasis on the core, everyday goals that each of us embrace, moving forward, building community, and reaching our potential. The Jewish community comes out of its suffering with a strong will to continue living, and Judaism's self-deprecating sense of humor summarizes the effort to move forward with a simple yet seemingly out-of-place command, let's eat. Despite the theological differences some of us may embrace regarding the role of suffering in our lives, we thankfully find ourselves reaching for the same goals. The Jewish community has strongly embraced the fight for civil rights throughout history, from the Freedom Rides of 1961 to the march from Selma to Montgomery in 1965, when Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel walked in the front row with Dr. King. Jews were prominent participants in the battle for civil rights and suffered for acting upon their beliefs. Of the thousands of white activists who headed south, nearly half were Jewish. For the Jewish community, moving forward with life means engaging in life, working for social justice, and not allowing ourselves to stand idly by when our neighbor's life is in danger. So regardless of how we understand suffering, Jews everywhere nod their heads in agreement when hearing the words Dr. King said immediately after the passage that we spoke of earlier. In the next breath, Dr. King calls our nation to action, saying, "Go back to Mississippi, go back to Alabama, go back to South Carolina, go back to Georgia, go back to Louisiana, go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair." It was Dr. King's vision that you and I continue to live, that we take our mountains of despair and turn them into stones of hope. In typical Jewish fashion, I share with you a story, first told by the Maggid of Dubno, an 18th century Jewish sage who lived in the Ukraine. The Maggid told a story about a prince who owned one of the most beautiful and flawless diamonds in the world. One day the prince noticed that somehow the diamond had developed a deep scratch. And the prince immediately summoned the finest diamond cutters to examine the diamond and return it to its original condition. However, none of the diamond experts could promise that the diamond would ever be restored to its original perfection. Then a particularly creative and visionary diamond cutter appeared and offered to create an even more beautiful diamond out of the blemish. When he finished, the prince saw the deep scratch had become the stem of a rose, and that the diamond cutter had etched the rose's flower and leaves onto the stem. And in doing so, he transformed the scratch into a mark of beauty. The diamond with its rose engraving became the most original and magnificent stone the prince had ever seen, and became even more precious to the prince than before. Each time the Maggid of Dubno told this story, he would conclude by explaining that just like the diamond with the scratch, you and I, our communities and our nation, all have scratches, faults, and blemishes. It is up to each one of us as individuals and collectively to not wallow in the valley of despair, but rather to transform those scratches, faults, and blemishes into things of beauty and value. I feel that you and I do this whenever we move our communities and ourselves from despair to hope. In other words, let's eat, let's live. Let us each make a commitment to continue living as equal partners in all aspects of life. As we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King's life, we honor his memory every time we take our past, flawed and blemished by repression, servitude, suffering, and anguish, and turn that past into a brighter future of freedom, equality, redemption, and faith. Whether our slavery ended 3,000 years ago or just 1.5 centuries ago, no matter how we interpret suffering or how we transcend our suffering, together we can walk in concert with Dr. King's vision of taking a mountain of despair and turning it into a stone of hope. Thank you.
Good afternoon. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of a mountain of despair a stone of hope. How prophetic. We want to thank Dean Roberts, Reverend Thomas, Rabbi Weiss for framing very eloquently some thoughts and reflections on King's life. As you can see, this time of year brings special memories, special thoughts, and special celebrations of the life of Martin Luther King, the nationally and internationally acclaimed civil and human rights activist and Nobel laureate for peace. Thus, in the traditions of the academies across the nation and around the world, the University of Houston proudly presents this program today. One of King's greatest qualities was obviously leadership. The ability to lead people, an institution, causes and thoughts and philosophies across large groups of people. In recent years, the University of Houston has also been blessed with an outstanding leader, a person with great vision, a person with energy, a person with enthusiasm, a person who has a commitment to excellence. And so as we continue our program today, it is my distinct pleasure to present to you our leader, our president, Dr. Renu Couture, president of the University of Houston, and her remarks for the day. President Couture.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Good afternoon, everyone. It's very nice to see you all here. Congratulations to organizers. What an incredible turnout it is, and congratulations to you all for having commitment, for being here, and for thinking of Dr. Martin Luther King today and everything that he has taught. I am very honored to have a few moments to think about an event or a time period when faith turned into hope and hope into dreams and dreams into actions and so on. So the day is January 13th, 1948. After 200 years of colonization, the British have given India its independence. However, while leaving India, they also carved the nation into two parts: India for Hindus and Pakistan for Muslims. 15 million people became homeless overnight. They were uprooted. Hindus living in Pakistan territory had to move to India. Muslims living on the Indian territory had to move to Pakistan. Many chose not to move, but most choose to make the move. You can imagine people are angry, they are frustrated, they are leaving everything they have earned behind. They're taking their families, they're leaving to the land they know nothing about. They have no means to support themselves, they have no jobs, no money, no shelter even. As trains carrying Hindus and Muslims from India and Pakistan cross borders, people become even more angry. They take out their frustration on those who are innocent, who are just like them, homeless. But nonetheless, the killings continue. 1 million people are already dead by this time. These are the lowest of the low days for India and the darkest of the dark moments for the people of India. Mahatma Gandhi is 78 years old. He's frail, he's weak, he's sick, and he's looking for hope. All efforts to bring any kind of rationality, reason, have failed.